When Eleanor passed away, it seemed her quiet world, and the bond she shared with her cat Charlie, ended with her. To everyone else, he was just an old cat, too simple to grieve, too small to be noticed. But each morning he carried a single leaf to her grave, and with that silent ritual revealed a truth no one saw coming. And just wait until you see how this gentle goodbye turned into the most unexpected act of love and remembrance. Eleanor Brooks had lived most of her life in a small, weathered house on the edge of town. People often called her quiet, maybe even reclusive, but those who knew her well understood she wasn't lonely, just peaceful. She found joy in the simple things: morning tea by the window, classical music playing low on the radio, fresh lavender in the kitchen, and handwritten letters she never rushed to send. And for the last 15 years of her life, she had Charlie. Charlie was never planned. He came into Eleanor's world on a rainy October evening, thin, shivering, and soaked to the bone. She found him curled beneath her garden bench, barely lifting his head as she approached. Something about the way he looked at her, silent, guarded but unafraid, made her pause. She opened the back door, expecting nothing. But Charlie stood up, walked in, and curled up beside her fireplace, as though he'd always belonged there. From that moment on, he was family. Eleanor never treated him like a pet. He sat beside her during long phone calls with old friends. He followed her from room to room like a quiet shadow. At night, he slept at her feet. On Sunday afternoons, he'd sit on the windowsill while she read novels out loud, not because he understood, but because the sound of her voice made the silence feel less empty. They became two creatures of routine, bound not by conversation, but by shared rhythm. And to anyone who asked, Eleanor simply said, "I don't have children. I have Charlie." When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, it was her niece Rachel who took care of everything. The funeral was small, respectful, filled with neighbors and old students who spoke gently of a kind woman who never asked for attention but gave it freely. Rachel, honoring her aunt's wishes, took Charlie home with her. She did everything right, gave him space, fed him his usual food, set up a warm bed by the window. But Charlie didn't settle. He wandered aimlessly, refused food, sat for hours at the front door, unmoving, his eyes unfocused, as if he was still listening for Eleanor's voice. Rachel tried her best to comfort him, but it was like trying to hold on to smoke. Something deep inside him had gone quiet. And then, one morning, Charlie disappeared. Rachel searched the neighborhood for hours. She walked the streets calling his name, shaking his treat tin, even posting online. Nothing. Not a sound. Not a trace. By evening, panic had turned into heartbreak. But the next morning, just after sunrise, he came back. Slowly, silently, he padded up the front steps of Rachel's house, carrying something in his mouth. A small, yellow leaf. He dropped it gently at the door, looked up at Rachel with tired, unreadable eyes, and then turned and walked away again. Not into hiding, not into fear, just into purpose. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, the leaf at her feet, trying to make sense of it. She had no idea that this was only the beginning, that the leaf wasn't random. It was a message, and Charlie wasn't done saying goodbye. At first, Rachel chalked it up to grief, not her own, but the cat's. She'd read somewhere that animals mourn in quiet ways. Some hide, others stop eating, some just wait at doors that never open again. But Charlie's behavior didn't quite fit any of that. Each morning, like the ticking of a clock, he would rise before the sun, nudge open the back screen door she had left slightly ajar for him, and vanish into the pale morning fog. And each day, sometime before noon, he would return, with a single yellow leaf in his mouth. Rachel noticed it the second time, then the third. Not just any leaf, always the same shape, small, golden, slightly curled at the edges like a heart folding inward. Not torn, not played with, each one intact, almost deliberate. He would drop it by the front door, glance at her silently, then settle by the window and sleep for hours. By the fourth day, Rachel could no longer convince herself it was just habit. She decided to follow him. She waited until he slipped out with the early breeze and kept her distance, moving quietly behind him, her shoes muffled by dew-wet grass. Charlie never looked back. He moved with purpose, no hesitation, no wandering. He padded down the street, past familiar mailboxes and driveways, then slipped through a gap beneath the old iron fence that bordered the town cemetery. Rachel slowed, her heart already beginning to understand something her mind couldn't yet accept. Charlie crossed the uneven gravel path, weaving between rows of stone markers. His steps were slow, almost reverent. And then he stopped, before a single headstone. Eleanor Brooks. Rachel froze, hidden behind a tree. A sudden stillness filled the air around her, as if the entire world had paused to witness what would happen next. Charlie stood at the foot of the grave for a moment, yellow leaf still clutched in his mouth. Then, with the gentlest movement, he placed it on the grass, just above her name, where the morning light had begun to filter through the trees. He didn't meow, didn't cry. He simply lay down beside it, front paws tucked in, eyes half closed, tail curled around him. A breeze moved through the cemetery, ruffling the fur behind his ears. He didn't react. Rachel felt something tighten in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Grief, yes, but also awe, wonder, a quiet sorrow that was somehow beautiful. She had never told Charlie what had happened, hadn't tried to explain, but he knew. Not in the way humans know, but in the deeper, older way some animals do. The kind that doesn't need words. He understood she was gone, and he had found his own way to say goodbye, one leaf at a time. The days passed, and the pattern never changed. Rain or shine, wind or frost, Charlie continued his ritual. Always at first light, always returning before noon, and always with one small, heart-shaped leaf. Rachel stopped trying to make sense of it. She didn't interfere. She simply waited by the window, watching as the little figure moved down the street, slow but steady, leaf by leaf. It had become part of her day, not just a mystery, but something sacred, as if Charlie was doing what no one else could, carrying grief, softly, with grace. Weeks turned into over a month. One afternoon, while walking home from the grocery store, Rachel ran into Mrs. Langley, Eleanor's longtime neighbor and friend. A woman in her 90s, sharp as ever, wrapped in a deep green cardigan and memory. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then shared the story. The leaves, the grave, the visits, the silence. Mrs. Langley didn't seem surprised. She just smiled, gently, almost wistfully. "You know," she said, "Eleanor used to take Charlie on little walks. Every autumn, they'd go to the old elm by the west side of the cemetery. She always said its leaves were different, soft like cloth. She called them her little reminders that time moves gently. She'd pick one, tuck it in her book, and say it helped her remember the seasons, not the loss." Rachel felt the air shift around her. Suddenly, it all made sense. Every step, every leaf, every mourning. Charlie hadn't just been mourning. He had been remembering, honoring something only he and Eleanor truly shared. Those leaves weren't offerings. They were conversations. One-sided, maybe, but no less sincere. They were quiet. "I still remember." They were soft. "I'm still here." They were silent. "I haven't forgotten." Rachel felt her throat tighten again, not from sorrow, but from understanding. And then, one morning, Charlie didn't come home. She waited until noon, then until dusk. She searched the backyard, the street, called his name with a voice too familiar with silence. But deep down, she already knew. As the sun began to fade, she walked to the cemetery. Her heart pounded as she followed the now familiar path, breath catching with every step. And there, under the tree Eleanor once loved, she saw it. A single yellow leaf. Perfect. Untouched. And beside it, curled in the grass with the same quiet stillness he had offered every day, lay Charlie. His small body at peace, his journey complete. No drama, no sound, just presence. His last gift, his final goodbye. Two companions, reunited, not in words, not in ceremony, but in the soft language they had shared all along: patience, memory, love. Rachel knelt beside them. She didn't cry right away. She just sat there, hands in her lap, eyes on the ground, feeling something hard to name. Not just sadness, something fuller, something like peace. Because now she understood, love never ends in silence. Sometimes it ends in leaves.